Well, Vitalii, thank you so much for joining us today. I understand that you're sitting in your base quite near the front line in eastern Ukraine, where you're a chaplain and have been a chaplain for 2.5 years now.
Sure, 2.5 years.
And Vitalii, you've agreed to talk to us about this topic of seeing the smiling face of God behind a frowning providence. Over the last 2.5 years, you've experienced enormous upheaval in your own life and seen men around you and their families very traumatized and going through great suffering. As a believer, what have you found hard to deal with in that context?
Uh, the hardest thing is, of course, not as even as a believer for me, but as just a human being, as a husband and father, to be for so long time without my family. Moreover, to realize that their lives are under the constant threats. Kyiv, the capital city of Ukraine, which they live, is under the constant threat of the drones, kamikaze missiles, and I live in this constant fear that they can be under big threat, and it gives me a lot of pain. Also, as a chaplain, when I see the tears of wives and children who lost their fathers, it hurts me very deeply. And it seems to me that I find this the hardest things to deal with when I see the sufferings of other people, especially little children and wives. It hurts me so deeply that it breaks my heart.
Vitalii, this may be a hard question to answer, but have you been through dark times when you were tempted to, I don't know how you'd put it, feel let down by the Lord, tempted to be angry? Have you been through any of those difficult times?
Oh, well, not only tempted, I was often angry, but not anger frightens me the most. There are more subtle enemies of mine. Recently, one soldier said that they do not lose their faith in God on the war. They lose their faith in His goodness. And part of me, the righteous one, the orthodox one, was very quick to give the right answer, but there was another voice which was ready to say, in some degree, I agree with that words, and I want to be first of all honest before God. I don't want to be the hypocrisy. It's difficult to recognize that I have doubts in God's goodness and love, but I remember the hero of the Bible, the famous Job, was asking God very similar questions, and I would like to imitate him, to be honest before God, not to be on the side of his friends who were talking rightly about God, but the Lord finally he disproved those, and he approved Job. And I would like to be very honest before God, because it's very hard to recognize that you have some difficulties with your faith, to question God about His love and goodness. As another issue is forgiveness. It so frightens me that the war sooner or later will end up, but I have to forgive my enemies.
Well, thank you for speaking so frankly. But you've mentioned a couple of places in the Bible you turn to. How do you see behind a frowning providence, to see the Lord's hand? And which particular parts of the Bible, you've already mentioned the book of Job, which particular parts of the Bible do you turn to understand the Lord's providence?
Well, I think although the book of Job is very helpful in my conditions, but the first place goes to the book of Psalms. My soul finds a very deep satisfaction in this book, um, because those passages were written by David, who was a warrior, and his life was often under the threat. And I can, when I read these texts, passages, I see them more clearly than before the war. And they are full of God's justice. I have to recognize that I think all Ukrainians, they are reading the book of Psalms differently, how they read before the big war and after. Some Psalms which are very difficult, it used to be for us when the Psalms which are talking about God's justice, that He is revealing His justice over the wicked nations, wicked enemies. But and I often didn't understand those passages, but now my soul strangely, maybe sounds very strangely for you, but now my soul finds very deep peace when I read about God's justice.
And you mentioned the honesty with which you find yourself talking to the Lord and talking to yourself. And I suppose you see that also in the book of Psalms as well. Vitalii, you must be very aware, as you see the impact of that suffering and trauma on other people around you, particularly soldiers, that those people are strongly affected by that. And you'll never be the same Vitalii as you were 3 years ago. How do you seek to honor the Lord Jesus in your life, knowing that you will inevitably be affected by some of the horrors of war that you've seen?
Well, the best way to honor the Lord Jesus is to be faithful to Him in doing what He expects from me. When I was working in the seminary as a pastor, I wanted to be faithful in doing what I was doing. But now Christ has entrusted me with many soldiers' souls. The souls of Ukrainian soldiers now are my shrine. My task is to bring heaven, as someone said, to those soldiers' soul. And I am trying to do faithfully, although I never thought that the Lord will call me to this ministry. Never thought. So the best way to honor my Lord is to be faithful in the situation I am now, whatever it is. As a pastor, as a chaplain, I have to honor him. Yes, of course, the war has changed me, and to the extent that sometimes when I'm thinking about this, it's even scares me, because the changes not all good. There are good changes in me as well, but there are changes which I have to face them, and I have to think deeply about them, and even to recognize them. I don't want sometimes to recognize those changes, bad changes in my heart. But as I said, there are also good changes in me. I learned how to better love my fellow soldiers, how to be more compassionate to them, how to listen better to others. And those lessons are gained by very difficult experience, but they are very precious to me because of that. And they help me to honor the Lord better.
And how do you encourage other believers I imagine you must know believers in the army to whom you are ministering, and other chaplains to whom you're ministering. How do you encourage them to live lives worthy of the gospel in such extreme situations?
Because those difficult circumstances often they are so difficult that many people just are lost in those circumstances. They don't know how to behave, what to do.
Mm,
I try to be, as I said, faithful to the Lord and to serve, to be a channel of His love, to be present with people, to be with them, and by my own example, that it is possible to love even better in these circumstances. By my own example, I encourage other Christians to go on
mm.
serving, press on, fulfilling their Christian responsibilities, doing our mission, so to speak.
And how do you speak? You must come across many soldiers who are come from an Orthodox Christian background, who may never have heard the gospel. I suspect you come across many people who are atheists. How do you point them to the Lord Jesus Christ? How do you point them to the gospel?
There are some atheists, but not so many. But even atheists, when they see the love of Christ, they permit me even to pray for them and to talk about Christ. But usually we have very simple and very short messages to our soldiers, because some of them they can be taken into very difficult battle next day. We have very short time to preach the gospel,
Mm,
and usually I try to
mm,
tell them very simple stories about Christ, how he loves them, and how he even has given his life instead of them, suffering on the cross. It's very
mm,
simple words. It's not a church pulpit when I can exercise my seminary skills, but I have learned how to talk to people in the way that they can understand the message of the cross. And actually, this is the very
mm,
simple and basic message that that Christ loved them, and he calls them to him, to accept his suffering, his work on upon the cross. Sometimes many soldiers come after these simple messages, and they want to hear something more. I give them gospels, and I give the prayer book, and encourage them to pursue the Lord through reading and prayer, like that. It's nothing extraordinary. It's very simple words,
mm,
but spoken with love of in my heart, the love of Christ.
mm.
I
Vitaly, you've been now, as I mentioned earlier, 2.5 years, I think, in the army. It's a long time, and you've faced some very traumatic situations. What keeps you going? You've mentioned the passages in the Bible you look to, and your walk with the Lord. What else keeps you going?
Let me to compare my situation. I like to do this with the Morse code, with long dashes of dark periods of God's silence, and small dots. But those small dots are very peculiar. Usually it comes when I pray in a time when I am very tired, exhausted. I do not expect something happening, or reading very familiar passage from the scriptures, very familiar, and also do not expect. Sometimes I do not want even to read this passage, but in 1 second the Lord comes to me, and he changes radically the situation. The dark place turns to be filled with light, and my soul exhausted, filled with joy, and those little dots keeps me going. It happens sometimes that weeks and weeks I am just doing my routine work and very tired, and even do not feel the hand of the Lord upon me. But then happens this, and everything changed. And those little dots are very important. They are not they do not happen very often, but they are, and they help me to go on with my mission, with my task.
Thank you. We were looking at recently. We were looking at Psalm 27, and which ends, "Wait for the Lord." Between the long dashes, as it were, and for the dots, wait for the Lord. You've often said that how greatly encouraged you feel to know people are praying for you. How would you encourage people to pray for believers in Ukraine, and others, particularly in their families, going through great suffering? How do you encourage people to pray for chaplains and pastors like yourself who are ministering to people going through traumatic situations?
Just remember that pastors and chaplains who are ministering to people going through this very serious traumas, that they are also human. They are also humans. They need, of course, a lot of wisdom and strength, but they are, so to speak, this ring bearers. They are affected with everything they hear as they are involved in this ministry. They listen to those people, and they take into their hearts those words. They are affected by those words. There is even a special term called vicarious trauma about this kind of experience pastors and chaplains get from as they counsel, they ministering to people who are suffering. And it can be very, very difficult for them to cope with listening, as listening to the other people who are sharing their experience. So pray for them, so that the Lord can really strengthen them. It's very difficult to do this kind of ministry. 2 years in of my ministry as a battalion chaplain almost broke me, as I was listening and looking at many people suffering as they lost their close friends, lost their husbands and sons, and it almost ruined me. I had to take a break, and the Lord provided me with kind of another job, another chaplain ministry, which now I'm not dealing straight with this raw facts of war, with deaths of my fellow soldiers and funerals. And you, as you pray for those pastors and chaplains, remember this.
Vitalii, thank you so much for opening your heart to us, sharing with us with such insight. We do pray for you. Many people in the UK pray for you and other believers in Ukraine. We also pray for an end to this war speedily. But thank you so much for speaking to us and giving us such great insight.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope, although this experience is not put orderly as a war around me, but hopefully sometime I will think deeply about this and maybe lay down in a much orderly way.